Reality is anarchy. Many people have become anarchist advocates of a society without any ruling class after having come to the conclusion that society would be more prosperous, more peaceful, and would enjoy more justice and security without any government at all. However, that is somewhat akin to an individual deciding, after careful analysis, that Christmas would work better without Santa Claus. But if Santa Claus is not real, it is pointless to have any debate about whether he is needed in order for Christmas to work. If Christmas works at all, it already works without Santa. And so it is with the usual debate between government and anarchy. Government does not exist, it never has and never will, which can be proven using logic that does not at all depend upon any individual's moral beliefs. To quickly rehash, people cannot delegate rights they don't have, which makes it impossible for anyone to acquire the right to rule authority. People cannot alter morality, which makes the laws of government devoid of any inherent authority, ergo, authority, the right to rule, cannot logically exist. The concept itself is self contradictory, like the conception of a militant pacifist. A human being cannot have superhuman rights, and therefore no one can have the inherent right to rule. A person cannot be morally obliged to ignore his own moral judgment, therefore no one can have the inherent obligation to obey any other. And those two ingredients, the ruler's right to command and the subject's obligation to obey, are at the heart and soul of the concept of authority, without which it cannot exist. And without authority, there is no government. If the control which the gang called government exerts over others is without legitimacy, it is not government. Its commands are not laws. Its enforcers are not law enforcement. Again, without the right to rule and the simultaneous moral obligation to obey on the part of the masses, the organization called government is nothing more than a gang of thugs, thieves, and murderers. Government is an impossibility. It's simply not an opinion, any more than Santa Claus is an option. And insisting that it is necessary when it does not and cannot even exist, or predicting doom and gloom if we do not have the mythical entity, does not change that fact. To argue that human beings need to have a rightful ruler, one with the moral right to forcibly control all the others, and one whom all the others are obligated to obey, does not change the fact that there is no such thing and can be no such thing. As such, the purpose of this final chapter is not merely to argue that society would work better without the fiction called government, but to introduce to the reader ways in which people will perceive reality differently, think differently, behave differently, and interact differently, very differently, indeed once they give up the most dangerous superstition, the belief in authority. Anarchy meaning an absence of government, is what is. It is what has always been and always will be. When people accept that truth and stop hallucinating a creature called authority, they will stop behaving in the irrational and destructive manner they do now. Almost everyone, at least to begin with, has difficulty clearly thinking about such a concept because every politician and every government is constantly proposing solutions that deal with how society will be organized, managed, and controlled through a centralized authoritarian system. Most people do not even know how to mentally process the idea of a complete lack of any forcibly imposed system. They instinctively ask things such as, "How would the roads work?" Or, "How would we defend ourselves?" The truth is that no one can know how everything would work or what all will happen. Individuals can make suggestions about how things should work or predictions about how things might work, but no one can possibly know the best way for everything to work. Despite the huge amount of uncertainty this creates, the historical track record of people living in freedom is far better than any centralized, managed solution has ever been. However, statists have been trained to be terrified of this infinitely more complex type of society where there is not one master plan, but billions of individuals interacting with each other in innumerable different ways. To them, that means chaos. And in a way, it is chaos in the sense that there is no single guiding idea and no single controlling entity. This does not mean that people cannot make agreements or work together or cooperate and find compromises. Instead, it means that each person will view life as an adult instead of throwing away his free will and responsibility to blindly follow someone else's agenda. As an aside, even without the authority superstition, there will still be leaders and followers, but it would usually be actual leadership where one person leads by example, by demonstrating a level of intelligence, compassion, or courage which inspires others to behave similarly. This is a very different phenomenon from what is usually dubbed leadership today. When people talk of the leaders of a country, they are talking about people coercively controlling millions of others. The term leader of the free world, when talking about a government official, is inaccurate and self contradictory. Politicians do not lead by example. If anything, they set an example of how to be dishonest, conniving, narcissistic, and power happy. They say what people want to hear in order to dominate and control them. To call such people leaders is as ridiculous as calling thieves producers or calling murderers healers. In the absence of the belief in government, real leaders could emerge, people who claim no right to rule, no right to force anyone else to follow them, but whose virtues and actions others recognize as being worth emulating. No one could predict, and no one will control, what all will happen in a world without the myth of government. The following is not, therefore, intended to be a complete explanation of how every piece of human society would work once the authority myth is gone. Instead, it is an introduction to a few of the ways in which human beings might stop allowing an irrational superstition to distort their thinking and pervert their behavior, and might start behaving as rational, free beings driven by their own free will, individual judgment, as they ought to be.